is MorningLine with Nick Beres.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres with you on this Wednesday. Some of you may have stayed up late watching the election results. A lot of the things at this point not completely in. We'll have more of that coverage throughout the day, but we're not talking about elections this morning. We're having a regular guest with us on. As I mentioned earlier this week, Clint Kelly is joining us, our malpractice attorney, and it is the day after the election. But
Good morning,
we're
sir.
not even at the point yet where we know all the results in, so maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow.
It's almost like waiting on a jury. It really is.
It is kind of. They're tallying up the votes.
Yeah.
And that's what they do with a jury, tallying them up. But, some people maybe stayed up all night and they're joining us now. So shifting the gears to malpractice, which is you are a malpractice attorney.
Yes.
A lot of our regulars know who you are, but we always like to start it with many of the new people that sometimes join us every single day, what it's all about. Malpractice and what you do.
Malpractice is a major medical mistake that causes a major injury. We all have rules in our profession that we have to follow, and doctors are no different, as well as nurses. And when they violate those rules, we call it a deviation from the standard of care. And when that causes a major injury, then the patient has a medical negligence case that can be brought.
Okay. Among other things, there's probably people sitting there thinking, well, I had a negative reaction to a medicine I took, or the doctor messed it up and I didn't heal up the way I thought. It doesn't always mean that there was malpractice, right? I mean, doctors are not miracle workers. Sometimes they do everything by the book and things don't work out.
That's correct. We call those bad outcomes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they happen when the doctors do everything that they're supposed to, as well as nurses. In fact, a lot of cases that is the situation. But when they do violate the standard of care, and patients generally know, their families know, it's kind of like a hair that raises on the back of your head, or a gut feeling that something was missed or the ball was dropped. Oftentimes another doctor will come in the room and say, I think you need to take a look at this. Or I've even had cases where they say you need to go talk to a lawyer. Those are situations where you pick up the phone and you call. Call's always free, consultation's free. Patients pay nothing unless money's recovered for them. That's certainly the way I do business, and it never hurts to ask. I mean, I think the people that don't ask and go to their grave wondering, why am I in a wheelchair? Why did mama die?
Yep.
Those things ought to be investigated.
All you do is malpractice.
Correct.
How long have you been doing it?
30 years.
All right. And this is where I want to ask you. I haven't asked you this in a while. In your 30 years, and we talk about malpractice cases, aside from the laws and the tort law that's changed and made it more difficult to sue, we know about that. How have things changed, in your opinion, with regard to medical care in our hospitals with our doctors, especially maybe just in recent years? For the worse?
I'm going to say it's a mixed bag. I say on the one hand for the worse because the volume is up. And the supply is still not high enough to meet that volume. So medicine is assembly line care. And so patients get less time with their doctors, less time with their surgeons. The surgeons who, have so much work they have to do in a given day only have so much time to spend with the patient and make sure everything is correct. And they still do a great job in general. But the margin for error is shrunk so small that you're having a lot of mistakes being made that have no business being made because there's just too much volume out there. On the other hand, I think the advent of electronic medical record keeping, while there's some in the healthcare business don't like that, I think that's made a huge difference in improving healthcare, because now doctors have access to information on patients they never used to have.
They can just share these records very quickly between hospitals, between doctors' offices.
That's correct. And you can look up a patient just like you'd look up Google and find out something in that patient's background that can make the difference between life and death.
Okay, but also I remember you telling me, Nick, it's to the point, and I looked into this after you did. I think I even did a story on it about telemed, but the idea that there are times now where there can be patients in a room and they're wheeling a TV monitor in there. And on closed circuit TV is where the doctor is, maybe some office, maybe not even in that city, talking, but not really face to face like you and I, where they can touch and examine, and they're talking. I understand, maybe sometimes there's no choice, and that's better than nothing, but I want to be face-to-face where a doctor can see me and maybe do an exam, or, I mean, what about things like that?
I know it's what you want, but that's going to cost more money, Nick, because the telemedicine's here to stay. All COVID did was accelerate that way of practice, and the insurers are going to promote it because it's cheaper, and the reimbursement rates are lower for that, so that's going to become a common set piece of health care.
All right. as far as doctors are concerned, meeting with patients, the medical technology's improved. As far as, some of the new procedures being made, there's always advances there. But a lot of times with advances, say, in joint surgeries, things like this, that's where mistakes happen.
Yeah, I mean, not only in the surgery, but also in the product. We'll talk about the Exactech product pretty soon.
That's kind of leading us up to.
Yeah, and it actually, with regard to joint replacement surgery, it's still, while it is much more common now, there's still pitfalls in it. The surgeons do, in general, the best they can, but there are risks of infection, failure of the joint to take, to root itself properly or seed properly where the patient can use it. And then, of course, the product itself. And if the product is defective, the surgeon can't do anything but put it in and then sometimes take it out. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's some of the litigation I'm involved in now, because there are products that are made by a company called Exactech that makes this knee implant, and it's been failing to such an extent the FDA has issued a recall.
Okay, aside from that, and we'll get into this, I'd like to lay it out for our viewers as well. Other types of cases you're handling are the types of cases that, the rank and file out there might say, okay, yeah, I know someone, or this rings a bell with me. What kind of cases should people be thinking about? I guess, of course, it's individual, but what's out there? What are more common?
Yeah, well, the typical medical negligence cases that I get involved in are surgical mistakes. And I mean bad ones, Nick, not ones that, sometimes the doctors can make a mistake that is, they're all human. But there are mistakes and there are bad mistakes. I take the bad mistake cases. Also cases where patients have blood clots when they were supposed to be prevented. Hospitals nowadays, they have great expertise in preventing blood clots, and blood clots kill. So I've had those cases as well. Birth trauma cases where babies are born, but they were injured during the birth process. And, that can be a product of the nursing negligence or an OBGYN that doesn't follow the rules. Those are the medical negligence side. And then, of course, the defective medical product side, because that's where my expertise is really in the medical part of it. The Exactech litigation, which, by the way, I had Stryker cases. Those were shoulders made by Stryker. That's
I remember that,
another medical device maker. And Smith & Nephew, who made defective knees. Those defects are different from Exactech, but pharmaceutical liability litigation to do some of that as well. Bad medicine, bad drugs. We had Xarelto cases. And Pradaxa cases. So that's really the mainstay of my practice. I'd say about 80% of it, those medical negligence.
Hey, by the way, how is it comes about, the Stryker case or something like that, where you have an implant that, I guess, to be used, didn't it have to be FDA approved or what, So, I mean, it goes through testing. They're not just making it and throwing it in someone's shoulder, but then they discover there's a mistake there. How does that happen?
Yeah, with Stryker, it was pretty simple. It was because the material that was used on a batch was defective.
Okay.
So they broke.
Okay.
So you'd have the ball insert.
So the design was fine.
Correct. The design was fine. The product was approved by the FDA, but there are certain materials, ingredients of the machine, if you will, that were defective, and that's the reason why many of those, they were shoulders. Generated some litigation across the country. It's called mass tort litigation because the materials were defective.
Okay, and then medicines, when they go south, I mean, they go through approval testing process. I keep thinking about the movie The Fugitive, because wasn't it all about how this drug that was being tested, and I don't know if you saw The Fugitive, Harrison Ford, the whole idea they were trying to pass it through and cover it up and hide the fact that there was a side effect and get it to the market and make all this money. Does that kind of stuff happen?
Well, actually, art imitates life, doesn't it?
Okay, well, yeah.
There is truth to that, and not just that happens in a number of different drugs where the clinical trials themselves are a joke. They're supposed to follow FDA rules, but we look at the clinical trial process and we can tell ourselves whether or not they were done properly. All you have to do is get the FDA to look the other way and get a product out there on the market, and the manufacturers have a pretty clear mindset how they handle it. We'll make enough money selling this drug that we can create a pot over here on the side and use it to compensate consumers who use the drug and get injured.
Yep.
And we'll still make, particularly if it's $1 billion drug.
Think about that. I mean, that's where I was wondering if you were going to go. They know that there could be some bad effects. It may kill some people.
Correct.
But they're making so much money. I wonder if this is part of it with that huge opioid settlement.
Yeah.
Right? Is that kind of an example of that? They were just cranking out the pills, knowing full well it's going to get a bunch of people addicted. Well, I forget the name of the family, among others who settled. Billions.
Yeah, Purdue Pharma was the name of the manufacturer.
Billions of dollars in settlements. They had so much that they can settle with all these people that OD'd and died, and still.
Nick, that's one of the interesting cases in American history where we had a drug that was legal, okay, but the whole addiction process was something you would see with illegal drugs.
Yeah.
And you're making money off of it. Legal money. It's not like black market money with people selling heroin or drugs on the streets. The manufacturers were selling these pills for decades and making a killing off of them, and at the same time killing patients, and they knew it. And that's why you're seeing these humongous settlements, because they've got the goods. And I mean, the plaintiffs, the people that represent the patients, and the states, attorney generals who brought these claims, they've got the goods on these drug manufacturers. They even have the goods on Walgreens and CVS.
And yet, these settlements, which are like, oh my gosh, how much money are they settling for, is still a drop in the bucket compared to the money they still hang on to.
They still made money, Nick.
They still made money, and they knew it, and it worked out. Listen, we'll take a break on that note. When we come back, we can take some calls. If you have a question, comment about a malpractice case along those lines, your chance to ask Clint personally right here and now. Also, he's involved in several high-profile local cases here. We're going to touch on some of those when we come back, some of which may affect you or one of your loved ones. So stick with us. We'll be back with Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney, right after this.